Millionaire mocked his mystery bride. Then she took off the veil. A millionaire marries a woman no one has ever seen, but when he finally demands to lift her veil, her answer stuns the entire room. A grand wedding hall, chandeliers casting golden light, hundreds of elite guests whisper behind champagne glasses. At the altar, David Whitman stares at his bride, her face hidden beneath an elegant silk veil. He steps forward, reaching to lift it, but just as his fingers touch the fabric, "Not yet," Anna whispers. The room gasps. David's jaw clenches. The entire city watches, desperate for answers. Why won't she let him see her face? What is she hiding? And why is he so obsessed with finding out? Stay till the end, because when the truth is revealed, no one will be the same. David Whitman, a self-made millionaire, built his life on control. Love was never part of the equation, until he was forced into a high society marriage. His bride, Anna, remains an enigma, never revealing her face, turning their union into a public scandal. Rumors swirl. She must be hiding something. Is she even who she says she is? Does David even know the woman he married? At first, David sees her as a problem to be solved. But as the world mocks their marriage, he begins to wonder, what if Anna isn't the one hiding? What if the real mystery is himself? Some secrets change everything. Some truths are impossible to ignore. And sometimes, the greatest love stories begin with the most unexpected question. Stay tuned, because when Anna finally takes off the veil, the world won't just see her. They'll finally see David too. What if the love of your life was the last person you ever expected? What happens when a millionaire meets a woman with nothing? A millionaire on top of the world. A woman who has lost everything. Their paths were never meant to cross, until fate intervened. A millionaire and a poor girl. A powerful CEO and a homeless woman. A love that defies status, wealth, and expectations. When power meets poverty. When a CEO falls for a homeless woman. Can love break the chains of wealth and status? Or will the past drag them into a battle of trust, sacrifice, and redemption? A secret too painful to reveal. A twist too shocking to ignore. A love too powerful to deny. If you believe love conquers all, don't forget, like this video to see more powerful love stories. Comment below. Would you choose love over wealth? Subscribe to Millionaire Love Stories and never miss a breathtaking romance. We judge too quickly. We assume too much. But what if we're wrong? Society loves a mystery, but it loves tearing one apart even more. So when David Whitman, a self-made millionaire and one of the city's most eligible bachelors, announced his sudden marriage, the rumors spread like wildfire. And when it was revealed that his bride, Anna Whitman, was a woman who never showed her face in public, the gossip turned into obsession. A marriage shrouded in secrecy. A woman who refused to be seen. A husband who looked anything but happy. It was all the public needed to turn their union into a spectacle. Why is she always veiled? She must be hiding something. Maybe she's disfigured. Maybe this was a business deal. Does David even know who he married? No one knew the truth. No one cared to know. Because in the world of the elite, perception was reality. And the perception of David and Anna's marriage? A scandal waiting to unfold. The man WHO had it all, except a choice. David Whitman never let anyone dictate his life. He built his empire on strategy, power, and control. He didn't believe in love. He believed in numbers, influence, and carefully calculated decisions. And marriage, as far as he was concerned, was nothing more than a merger, a transaction, like any other. So when his family demanded he marry for legacy, for stability, for image, he didn't argue. He signed the contract. He played the part. But nothing could have prepared him for his bride, or for the veil that separated them. The woman no one could read. Anna Whitman was a mystery. Not just to the public, not just to the journalists desperate for a headline, but to her own husband. She walked into their wedding with her head held high, refusing to flinch beneath the weight of 1,000 judging eyes. She stood at the altar with calm certainty, completely unaffected by the whispers, the speculation, by him. And when David reached to lift her veil, when he expected her to reveal herself, she stepped back, and she said the words that haunted him for weeks after. Not yet. Not yet? David had spent his life controlling every outcome, every negotiation, every deal, every situation. But Anna? She played by her rules. and she refused to let him be the one to decide when and how she would be seen. The world couldn't stop watching. Their wedding was the event of the year, but not for the reason it should have been. The reception hall buzzed with murmurs, guests stealing glances at the bride who refused to show her face. Journalists wasted no time flooding the media with speculation and theories. Millionaire's bride hides behind a veil. What is she afraid of? A beautiful heiress or a business transaction? The truth behind the Whitman wedding. What is Anna Whitman hiding? David heard it all, and for the first time in his life, he felt trapped, not because of the marriage, but because of the questions creeping into his own mind. What was she hiding? Why wouldn't she let him in? Why was he so damn fixated on the answer? He shouldn't care, but he did, and that terrified him. A wedding that shocked the city. The cathedral was filled with the city's most powerful elite. Every chair occupied, every eye locked on the bride and groom. Anna walked down the aisle with perfect poise, her gown flowing behind her, her face concealed behind a delicate silk veil. But the whispers weren't delicate. Why is she covered? Is she ashamed of herself? David must be furious. David clenched his jaw, his hands curled into fists at his sides as he watched his bride approach. Not because he was angry, not because he was humiliated, but because, for the first time in his life, he couldn't predict what came next. Session 1. When society won't stop judging. The Whitman estate was glowing under the golden lights of the grand ballroom, filled with the most powerful figures in high society. The celebration of David and Anna's marriage was supposed to be the perfect display of elegance and prestige. But it wasn't, because tonight, no one was celebrating the union of two souls. They were analyzing a mystery. They were whispering about her. Anna Whitman, the bride who never showed her face. The gala that fed the rumors. David stood near the grand staircase, his fingers tightening around the glass of whiskey in his hand. Everywhere he looked, people were stealing glances at his wife. They weren't admiring her, they were dissecting her, like she was a puzzle to be solved. A scandal waiting to be uncovered. He heard the whispers. Why is she still wearing the veil? What is she hiding? It's unnatural. A wife should stand proudly beside her husband, not lurk behind a mask. David clenched his jaw, his patience wearing thin. He had expected rumors after the wedding, but he hadn't expected this level of obsession. Or worse, the growing frustration bubbling inside him. He should have ignored it. He should have let it slide. But as he watched the press secretly snap photos of Anna from the corners of the room, as he heard yet another guest whisper a cruel theory, he found himself walking toward her. The man WHO hated losing control. Anna was standing by the tall glass windows, her posture relaxed, her gloved fingers gently wrapped around a champagne flute. She looked completely unbothered, as if she wasn't the center of a social circus. As if the whispers weren't directed at her. As if she was untouchable. David hated that it irritated him. When he reached her side, she turned slightly, her veiled face tilting toward him. "You look tense," she said softly. David exhaled sharply. "You don't." A faint chuckle. "Should I be?" "Anna," he lowered his voice. "Careful not to let anyone overhear. People are talking. They always talk." She lifted her glass, taking a slow sip. "I've learned not to let it affect me." David's patience thinned. "Well, it's affecting me." Anna lowered her glass. "Is it?" David's jaw tensed. "Do you even care what people are saying?" She tilted her head. "Do you?" His fingers curled around his drink, his frustration simmering. "You're making me look like a fool." Anna was silent for a moment. Then, she spoke so quietly he almost missed it. "Or maybe, you're letting them make you feel like one." David stilled. For the first time that evening, the frustration in his chest wasn't just directed at her. It was at himself. Because she was right. He was letting them get to him. The breaking point. The moment was interrupted by the sound of clinking glasses. David turned, his stomach tightening as he saw James Harrington, a businessman notorious for stirring trouble, raising his champagne in the center of the room. "A toast," James announced loudly, his voice dripping with amusement. "To the happy couple, David and his mystery wife." Laughter rippled through the crowd. David's grip on his glass tightened. James smirked. "Come now, David, you can't blame us for being curious. A man of your stature marries a woman we've never seen before. And yet, she remains hidden?" He lifted a brow. "We're all dying to know, when do we finally see the lovely face of Mrs. Whitman?" All eyes turned to David. Anna. The weight of expectation pressed down on him. He should have ignored it. He should have laughed it off. Instead, he turned to Anna and said the words he would later regret. Take it off. Silence. Anna didn't move. David's pulse pounded. Take off the veil. For the first time, her body stiffened. The entire room was watching. Waiting. Hungry for the drama. James grinned, enjoying the tension. But Anna? She stayed perfectly composed. Then, softly, calmly, she spoke. No. The air in the room shifted. David exhaled through his nose, his irritation reaching its peak. Anna, don't make this difficult. I'm not, she said simply. Her voice was gentle, but her words cut like a knife. I'm just refusing to entertain people who believe they have the right to see me on their terms. A stunned silence filled the room. James let out a low chuckle. Well, that's disappointing. David barely heard him, because something inside him snapped. Not in anger, not in humiliation, but in realization. Anna wasn't the one being controlled. He was. The aftermath. The rest of the evening blurred together. David spent the remaining hours dodging questions, making forced conversations, and drinking just enough whiskey to drown out his irritation. Anna, on the other hand, she continued moving through the crowd as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just rejected her husband's demand in front of the most powerful people in the city. As if she was completely unaffected. When the event finally ended and they returned home, David followed Anna into their shared estate. And the moment the doors closed behind them, he turned to face her. You didn't have to do that. Anna removed her gloves with careful precision, placing them on the table. Didn't I? David ran a hand through his hair, barely containing his frustration. You embarrassed me. Anna turned to him. No, David. Her voice was calm, but her gaze was sharp. You embarrassed yourself. David froze. He had expected defiance, expected stubbornness, but not this. Not her looking at him like he was the one who needed to learn a lesson. Anna stepped closer, her tone softer now. Tell me something, David. He exhaled sharply. What? She tilted her head. Are you angry because of what I did? A pause. Then, or because you realized you let them get inside your head? David didn't answer, because for the first time that night, he wasn't sure if he was angry at her, or himself. And as Anna walked away, leaving him alone with that unsettling realization, David knew one thing for certain. This marriage was not going to go the way he had planned. Session 2. When rumors spread like wildfire. David should have moved past it. It was just one night, one party, one moment of lost control. But the whispers from the Whitman estate gala hadn't faded. If anything, they had grown louder, and he was losing patience. The city couldn't stop talking. By the next morning, the media had latched onto the spectacle like sharks sensing blood. Headlines flooded the internet, each one bolder and crueler than the last. Millionaire's bride refuses to show her face. What is she hiding? A love story or a business deal? The Whitman marriage under scrutiny. His wife, or his biggest scandal? Gossip columns churned out wild theories. Some claimed Anna was disfigured. Others insisted she was hiding a scandalous past. A few even suggested she wasn't the real bride at all, just a stand-in for someone else. And while David had never cared about public opinion before, this time, he did. Because this time, the target wasn't just him. It was her. Behind closed doors, David tossed his phone onto his desk, frustration boiling in his chest. He had built an empire by controlling narratives, by making sure his name was untouchable. But now, he was the subject of mockery, a man whose own wife refused to be seen. And people were starting to use that against him. His competitors, his rivals, they were all watching, waiting for him to slip. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Come in, he called, rubbing his temples. The door opened, and Anna stepped inside. David looked up, exhaling sharply. Have you seen the news? She nodded, her expression calm, unbothered. David let out a humorless laugh. Of course you have. And yet, you don't seem to care. Anna folded her hands in front of her. Would caring change anything? David pushed himself out of his chair, closing the distance between them. This isn't just about you anymore, he said, voice clipped. People are talking, Anna, about me, about us, about this whole damn marriage. Anna didn't flinch. And what exactly are they saying? David's jaw tightened. That you're hiding something. Anna studied him for a long moment. Then, "Are you worried about what they think, David?" He exhaled sharply. "I'm worried about my reputation." A small, knowing smile touched her lips. "Are you sure it's just that?" David didn't answer, because he wasn't sure anymore. The storm gets worse. The pressure mounted day by day. Every social gathering, every business event, every time he stepped into a room, the whispers followed him. But it wasn't until an exclusive interview aired that David realized just how bad things had gotten. A talk show host smirked at the camera, her voice dripping with fake concern. "David Whitman has everything, a fortune, a legacy, and now, a wife who won't even show her face." The audience laughed. "The real question is, what is Anna Whitman hiding? And why won't her husband do something about it?" David turned off the screen, his blood boiling. This had gone too far. He was done playing along. The confrontation. That evening, David found Anna in the private library of the estate, sitting in a chair near the fireplace, a book resting in her lap. She looked up calmly as he entered. "You need to take it off," he said, voice firm. Anna didn't react. "Take what off?" David took a step closer. "The veil." Silence stretched between them. Finally, she closed her book. "Why?" David's patience snapped. "Because I'm tired of being a joke." Anna's expression didn't change. "So this is about you, then?" David clenched his jaw. "This is about the fact that people are laughing at me." "Anna, at us." She sighed, standing slowly. "And if I take it off? If I let them see my face, do you think that will end it?" "Yes," David snapped, "because then there won't be a mystery anymore." Anna tilted her head. "You think the problem is the mystery?" David stared at her, fists clenched. "What else would it be?" Anna exhaled. Then, quietly, "It's judgment, David, not mystery." He frowned. "What?" Anna stepped closer. "The problem isn't that they don't know what I look like." Her voice was soft, but sharp. "The problem is that they think they have the right to see me." David didn't move. "They've already decided I'm strange." She continued. "That I'm wrong. That I must be hiding something." Her voice lowered. "And even if I removed the veil today, tomorrow, they'd find something else to say." David's chest tightened. Because deep down, he knew she was right. A realization he didn't expect. David had spent his entire life controlling his own narrative. But for the first time, he realized he had been letting everyone else control this one. Letting them dictate how he felt about his own wife. Letting their whispers seep into his mind. David exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "So what, we just let them talk?" Anna gave him a small smile. "They'll talk anyway." He hated that answer. But he hated that she was right even more. The shift. For the next few days, David watched. Not the news. Not the rumors. But Anna. And what he noticed shook him. Because while he had spent the last few weeks battling public scrutiny, Anna had been living her life. She handled estate matters. She managed staff. She spoke to people with quiet confidence, never once letting the weight of public judgment change her demeanor. And David started seeing her differently. He realized something. Anna hadn't been hiding herself. She had been waiting for him to see beyond what everyone else saw, waiting for him to decide for himself what he believed. And for the first time, David wasn't sure if he liked the answer, because it meant he had been wrong about her all along. Session 3. Between supporters and skeptics. David Whitman had built his career on understanding people. He could walk into a boardroom, shake hands with powerful men, and immediately sense who was on his side and who wanted to see him fall. But in his own home, with his own wife, he had never felt more uncertain. The world had turned their marriage into a spectacle, a mystery wrapped in gossip, fueled by the fact that Anna Whitman refused to reveal her face. David had spent weeks believing the rumors, letting them seep into his mind. But now, he was starting to see her differently. And he wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. The world had picked sides. The public had split into two camps. On one side were the critics, the ones who fed on scandal, who whispered that Anna was hiding something terrible. On the other side were the admirers, the ones who saw her refusal to conform as a sign of strength, as an act of defiance against a society obsessed with appearances. And in the middle of it all, trapped between judgment and intrigue, was David. Did he stand with those who doubted her, or those who respected her? The question haunted him. Inside the Whitman household, David's home was a fortress of luxury, a sprawling estate that had once felt like a symbol of power, but now felt more like a cage. The staff had become silent observers, careful with their words, careful with their movements. But David wasn't blind. He saw the way some of them looked at Anna with curiosity and concern, unsure of what to make of her. And he saw how others looked at her with genuine respect, as if they had already made up their minds. A conversation that changed everything. One afternoon, David walked into the greenhouse on the estate, expecting it to be empty. Instead, he found Anna, standing among the roses. And she wasn't alone. Martha, the head housekeeper, was with her, speaking softly. David lingered in the doorway, watching. Martha had worked for the Whitman family for years. She was old-fashioned but fiercely loyal, and she had never spoken out of turn. So when he heard her say, "You're braver than they give you credit for, Mrs. Whitman," David froze. Anna chuckled lightly. "Brave?" Martha nodded. "Yes, dear. People fear what they don't understand. And you," she gestured at Anna, "you make them question themselves." David's stomach tightened, because he had questioned her too. Had doubted her. Had let the world's judgment become his own. The dinner party that tested him. That evening, David and Anna attended a private dinner with business associates. It was a small gathering, 8 people. A candlelit table, expensive wine, and polite conversation that hid deeper intentions. David had planned to ignore the tension. But then, a woman leaned forward, smiling sweetly at Anna. "You must be used to the attention by now, Mrs. Whitman," she said. "It's not every day that a woman chooses to remain unseen." Anna set down her wine glass. The room went silent. David stiffened. Then, Anna simply said, "I didn't realize a woman had to choose between being seen and being heard." The woman blinked, momentarily caught off guard. David exhaled. The sharpest minds in the city sat at this table. And yet Anna had just reminded them all. That power didn't always come from visibility. Sometimes, it came from knowing exactly when to speak, and when not to. David's conflict. That night, as they returned to the estate, David's mind was racing. He had spent so much time being frustrated with Anna. But now, he was starting to understand something. The world had seen mystery in her veil. But what if the real mystery was why people were so desperate to see her at all? And worse, what if he had been just like them? David turned to Anna as they stepped inside. "Back at dinner," he said, voice low, "that woman, when she questioned you, you didn't hesitate." Anna tilted her head. "Should I have?" "No," he admitted. Then, after a pause, "You're not afraid of them, are you?" Anna studied him for a moment before speaking. "I spent my life learning that people will see what they want to see," she said softly, "and that no matter what you give them, they'll always want more." David swallowed, because, deep down, he knew she was right. And for the first time since they were married, he wasn't sure who he was angrier at, the world, or himself. The moment that shook him. Later that night, David found himself unable to sleep. He wandered downstairs, drawn by the glow of a lamp coming from the library. Anna was there, sitting on the couch, reading. He hesitated. Then, before he could stop himself, he said the words that had been circling in his mind all night. "You make people uncomfortable." Anna looked up, raising a brow. David exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "You don't react the way they expect. You don't give them what they want. And that makes them uncomfortable." Anna closed her book slowly. "And what about you, David?" He held her gaze. "Do I make you uncomfortable?" David didn't answer right away. Because he didn't know. He had spent weeks fighting against her presence. Against the frustration of not understanding her. But now, he was realizing, it wasn't frustration he felt. It was fear. Fear that she wasn't the woman people assumed her to be. Fear that he had spent so long believing their version of the truth that he had ignored his own instincts. And fear that, for the first time in his life, he wanted to know someone more than he wanted to control them. The shift begins. David swallowed hard, forcing himself to speak. "I don't know," he admitted. Anna smiled, just slightly. "Then maybe it's time you figure it out." David exhaled, raking a hand through his hair. Because, deep down, he knew she was right. And for the first time since they got married, he wasn't trying to fight her anymore. Session 4. Discoveries that surprised David. David had spent weeks trying to figure Anna out. He had questioned her, challenged her, demanded answers. But the more he pushed, the more she held her ground. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met. And now, he was beginning to realize that was exactly what unsettled him the most. Because Anna Whitman wasn't just a mystery. She was a woman who didn't care if he solved her or not. The business crisis. It started as a normal morning at Whitman Enterprises. David had arrived at his office, ready to tackle the day's meetings, when his assistant rushed in, looking tense. "There's a problem," she said. David sighed, rubbing his temple. "Of course there is." She hesitated. "It's about the Hensley deal. There's a financial discrepancy, and if we don't fix it, the entire agreement could fall through." David's entire body went rigid. The Hensley deal was one of the biggest acquisitions his company had ever attempted. Months of negotiation, millions of dollars at stake. And now, there was a problem. "Who flagged it?" he asked. The assistant hesitated. "Your wife." David blinked. "What?" "She found an issue in the numbers." The assistant explained. "She asked to meet with the financial team this morning. And, well, she was right." David was stunned. Anna? The woman the world dismissed as a recluse. As a mystery. As someone insignificant? The woman who had never once asked about his business. She had found an error his own executives had missed. Without another word, David left his office and headed straight to the conference room. The moment he saw her differently. When he entered the room, he found Anna standing at the head of the long table, completely in control of the conversation. She was calm, precise, and unapologetically confident. "If you look here," she was saying, pointing to a financial report displayed on the screen, "you'll see that the projected figures don't align with market trends from the last fiscal quarter." The CFO, a man David had trusted for years, was nodding, looking both impressed and embarrassed. "You're right, Mrs. Whitman. I don't know how we missed this." Anna turned to the room. "You missed it because you assumed everything had been reviewed correctly. But assumptions in business are dangerous. Just as assumptions about people are." David felt that comment like a punch to the chest. Because she wasn't just talking about the deal. She was talking about him. He had assumed so much about her. That she was shy. That she was hiding. That she was passive. And yet, here she was, commanding a room full of executives as if she had been doing it her entire life. David wasn't sure whether to be impressed or infuriated that he was just now realizing how brilliant she was. A private conversation. After the meeting, David caught up with Anna as she walked down the hallway. "You're full of surprises," he said. Anna glanced at him. "Am I?" David let out a sharp laugh. "Don't play coy. You knew exactly what you were doing in there." She stopped, turning to face him. "I read through the reports last night and saw something was off." "Would you rather I have said nothing?" David studied her carefully. "No, I'm just wondering why you cared enough to look." Anna tilted her head. "Because whether you realize it or not, David, your business is now my business." The words hit him harder than he expected. Because she was right. This marriage had been arranged. It had started as a contract, a strategy. But somehow, somewhere along the way, Anna had stepped into his world, whether he had invited her or not. And for the first time, David wasn't sure how he felt about that. A shift he didn't expect. That night, David found himself watching her. Not in frustration, not in irritation, but in fascination. He saw the way she moved through the estate with quiet confidence. The way the staff seemed to trust her, to respect her, to listen to her. The way she never asked for validation, but somehow commanded it anyway. And David realized something that made his stomach twist. He had spent weeks trying to figure her out. But now, for the first time, he wasn't sure he wanted to solve her anymore. Because what if she wasn't a puzzle to be solved? What if she was something far more dangerous? What if she was someone he couldn't control at all? And worse, what if he didn't want to? Session 5. Questioning his own beliefs. David Whitman had always trusted his instincts. They had made him a millionaire, a leader, a man people feared and respected. But now, for the first time in his life, he was questioning himself. Because everything he had believed about Anna Whitman was turning out to be wrong. And that realization was unsettling. The seeds of doubt. For weeks, David had let the world shape his opinion of Anna. He had believed the rumors. He had let the whispers define her worth. He had assumed she was hiding. But now, he was starting to see what had been in front of him all along. Anna wasn't weak. She wasn't passive. She wasn't someone to be pitied. She was stronger than any of them. And he hated that he had been blind to it for so long. A question he couldn't ignore. David found himself staring out of his office window, watching the city lights stretch endlessly into the distance. His mind kept circling back to one single thought. Why did I believe them? Why had he been so quick to doubt Anna? Why had he let strangers' opinions shape how he saw his own wife? The answer hit him harder than he expected. Because, deep down, he had been just like them. He had judged her too. And that was something he wasn't sure he could forgive himself for. A conversation he wasn't ready for. That evening, David walked into the Whitman estate's library, finding Anna reading by the fireplace. The glow of the flames cast shadows across her features, her expression unreadable. He hesitated before speaking. "You knew, didn't you?" he said quietly. Anna didn't look up. "Knew what?" David took a slow breath. "That I doubted you." Finally, she closed her book, looking at him directly. "I knew," she said softly, "but it didn't matter." David felt something in his chest tighten. "Why?" Anna studied him for a long moment. Then, "Because I wasn't waiting for your approval." David. Silence. Then, a quiet chuckle escaped him, bitter, self-deprecating. "I don't think anyone has ever spoken to me like that before." Anna smiled faintly. "Then maybe you needed to hear it." David exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. He wasn't used to being the one who had to reflect, who had to admit he had been wrong. But with Anna, it felt inevitable, a shift he didn't expect. The next morning, David walked into the estate's gardens, expecting to clear his mind. Instead, he found Anna. She was kneeling near a bed of roses, carefully trimming the stems, completely focused on her task. She looked peaceful, unbothered by the world, and for the first time, David realized she wasn't just surviving in this marriage. She was thriving in it. She didn't need him to see her differently. But now, he wanted to. He wanted to understand the woman who had quietly shaken his entire world. And that terrified him more than anything. Because what if seeing her for who she really was meant admitting that he had never truly known himself? Session 6. The Turning Point. David Whitman had spent his entire life knowing exactly who he was. He was the man in control, the one who dictated the rules, the one who never let emotions cloud his judgment. But now, Anna Whitman was unraveling everything. He had fought against it, had convinced himself that her veil was a symbol of weakness, of deception, of something she was afraid of. But now he was beginning to see. The only person who had been blind this whole time was him. And tonight? Tonight would change everything. The gala that forced his choice. The annual Whitman Charity Gala was one of the most exclusive events of the year. Powerful figures, billionaires, the media, everyone who mattered in David's world would be there. And tonight, Anna would be attending. Still veiled, still a mystery to the world. And David had to decide. Would he continue letting their opinions shape his own? Or would he finally decide for himself who Anna really was? The pressure builds. As soon as they arrived at the venue, the whispers started. David felt them like a blade pressing against his back. She still won't show her face? He must be humiliated. What kind of marriage is this? David clenched his jaw, his grip tightening around his glass of whiskey. Across the room, Anna moved with effortless grace, her veil flowing behind her as she greeted guests with quiet confidence. She wasn't hiding. She was simply existing, and that, somehow, bothered people more than anything. Because she wasn't apologizing. She wasn't explaining. She wasn't begging for approval. And that terrified them. The moment that changed everything. David was mid-conversation with a business associate when he heard the inevitable question. James Harrington, the same man who had humiliated Anna at their wedding reception, smirked, swirling his drink. "Tell me, Whitman," he said casually, but his tone was laced with mockery. "At what point do you get tired of being married to a ghost?" The group laughed. David went completely still. A month ago, he would have felt that sting, would have been embarrassed, would have wanted to fight back. But now, the only thing he felt was anger. Because these men, these people, had never understood Anna. And neither had he. But now, he did. David slowly turned to Harrington, his expression unreadable. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You seem awfully obsessed with my wife." James. Harrington blinked, caught off guard. What?" David took a slow sip of his whiskey, his gaze sharp. "It's interesting, really. You keep talking about her, watching her, wondering about her. His lips curved into a smirk. One might think you're the one who's infatuated. The room fell silent. Harrington's face darkened. That's not. David shrugged. I get it. She's intriguing, isn't she? His voice lowered slightly. She makes people question themselves. His eyes swept over the group. Because deep down, you're all uncomfortable with the fact that you don't get to decide how she exists. The silence was deafening, and in that moment, David felt something shift. The world had been watching him, waiting for him to be ashamed of Anna. But he wasn't. Not anymore. And for the first time in weeks, he wasn't letting anyone else dictate how he felt about her. The decision that shocked everyone. David moved through the crowd, heading toward Anna, who was standing by the grand balcony doors, gazing at the city lights. She turned slightly when he approached. You look like a man with something on his mind. David exhaled slowly. I was. Anna raised an eyebrow. And now? His gaze locked onto hers. Now, I know exactly what I want. Before she could respond, David reached for her hand, and in front of the entire room, he said, You don't need to remove the veil. Anna. The words rippled through the crowd like an earthquake. People turned. Whispers erupted. David ignored them all. I don't need to see your face. He continued, his voice steady. Because you've already shown me who you are. Anna's breath hitched. For the first time, she looked surprised. You don't care anymore? She whispered. David shook his head. No. Then, softer. Because I see you. Anna. The world couldn't look away. No one spoke. No one moved. Because David Whitman, the man who had built his entire life on image and control, had just defied every expectation. He had chosen his wife over the world's approval. And for the first time since their marriage began, Anna didn't feel like a spectacle. She felt seen. She felt understood. And for the first time, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel with David. Safe. The shift that changed everything. As they left the gala that night, stepping into the privacy of their car, Anna finally broke the silence. You really meant what you said? David turned to her, his gaze steady. Yes. She studied him for a long moment. Then, softly, she reached for his hand. A quiet acceptance. A silent acknowledgement. And David knew. This marriage had changed forever. Because now, for the first time, it was real. Session 7. The Moment of Truth. David Whitman had spent his entire life believing that power came from control. Control over his company. Control over his image. Control over the narrative. But standing in front of his wife, the woman he had spent months misunderstanding, he realized something. Power wasn't about control. It was about choice. And tonight, Anna Whitman was about to make hers. The whispers never stopped. After the Whitman Charity Gala, the world was in shock. David had done the unthinkable. He had defended Anna, accepted her, stood by her without demanding to see the face behind the veil. And that single moment had shifted the entire conversation. For the first time, people weren't just criticizing Anna. They were questioning themselves. Have we been wrong about her? What if she's not the one hiding? What if we're the ones who refused to see? But even as the whispers changed, the curiosity only grew. And now, the world wanted more than just theories. They wanted the truth, the invitation that changed everything. 2 weeks after the gala, David received a call from one of the most powerful media moguls in the country. We want an exclusive interview with your wife. David hesitated. He had spent so much time shielding Anna from public scrutiny. But now, he wasn't sure if she even needed his protection. So that night, he asked her. A conversation in the dark. David found Anna standing on the estate balcony. The night air cool against his skin. She turned as he approached. Something's on your mind. David exhaled. They want you to speak. Anna studied him carefully. Who's they? The media. The world. He hesitated. Everyone who's been watching. A pause. Then, what do you think I should do? She asked. David shook his head. I think this is your choice. Anna tilted her head. You mean, for once, you're not going to try to control the situation? He smirked. I've learned my lesson. She let out a quiet laugh. Then, after a moment, I'll do it. David blinked. You will? Anna nodded. But on my terms. And just like that, the moment was set. The day the world held its breath. The interview was broadcasted live, streamed across the country, headlines plastered across every major news outlet. The woman WHO refused to be seen, now speaks. Anna Whitman breaks her silence. The truth behind the veil. David sat in the studio's private viewing room, watching through the glass as Anna took her seat. She was calm, poised, completely in control. The interviewer smiled, folding his hands on the desk. Mrs. Whitman, for months, the world has been fascinated by you. There have been endless questions, speculations, theories. He leaned forward. Tonight, we want to hear the truth. In your own words. Anna met his gaze without hesitation. And then, she spoke. The answers no one expected. Anna's voice was measured. I understand the curiosity, she said. I understand that people fear what they don't understand. And I understand that for many, I have become a symbol of something unknown. The interviewer nodded. Then let's address the biggest question. Why? Anna didn't flinch. Because I wanted to prove something. David sat forward in his seat. The interviewer raised a brow. Prove what? Anna took a breath. That people judge too quickly. That we assume too much. That we believe we have a right to define someone before we truly know them. A hush fell over the room. Anna continued. For months, the world has debated my existence. They have whispered about me, speculated about my past, created stories to fit their own perceptions. But not once did they ask themselves why they needed to know it all. David felt the weight of her words. Because they weren't just directed at the audience. They were directed at him, too. The moment of revelation. The interviewer leaned forward. So tell us, will you remove the veil? David's entire body tensed. He knew the answer before she even spoke. But this time, he wasn't afraid of it. Anna smiled softly. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached up. The audience gasped. David held his breath. And in front of millions of people, Anna Whitman removed her veil. The world fell silent. For the first time, they saw her. And she was beautiful. Not just in the way that made people stare. Not just in the way that silenced a room. But in the way that forced people to confront their own shame. Because she wasn't scarred. She wasn't hiding a deformity. She wasn't anything they had feared. She was just a woman. A woman who had held up a mirror to society and made them realize. The only thing ugly about this story had been their own judgment. David's realization. In that moment, David saw her differently. Not as the mystery wife. Not as the subject of speculation. Not as the woman he had doubted. But as someone he admired. Someone he wanted. Someone he respected. As the interview ended, as the world sat in stunned silence, David knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning. And this time, he wasn't going to fight it. Session 8. Society's reaction. The world had been obsessed with Anna Whitman's face. And now, they had seen it. But instead of answers, all they were left with was shame. Because she hadn't been hiding a flaw. She hadn't been deceiving anyone. She hadn't been anything they feared she was. She was just a woman who had refused to let the world define her. And for the first time, the world had to face the truth about itself. The aftermath of the interview. The moment Anna Whitman removed her veil. The internet exploded. The woman behind the veil, stunning, unapologetic, and powerful. Did we judge too quickly? The Whitman scandal turned social reckoning. Was it ever about her? Or was it about us? David watched as opinions shifted overnight. People who had once criticized her were now singing her praises. She's brilliant. She never needed to prove anything to us. We were wrong to judge her. But some refused to admit they had been wrong at all. They twisted the narrative. This was a stunt. She played us all. She knew exactly what she was doing. David knew that would happen. Because people hated being proven wrong. Anna's response to the world. A week after the interview, Anna sat in the Whitman estate's sunroom, her tea untouched. David watched her from the doorway before finally stepping inside. You've been quiet, he said. Anna glanced up, a small smile touching her lips. Have I? David sat across from her. You've seen the reaction. I have. David studied her carefully. And? Anna exhaled, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. It's fascinating. David raised a brow. Fascinating? She nodded. They spent months trying to tear me apart. Trying to fit me into a box they could understand. And now that they've seen me. Her gaze lifted to meet his. They don't know what to do with themselves. David smirked. You enjoy that, don't you? Anna's lips curved slightly. A little. David let out a soft chuckle. Shaking his head. He had never met anyone like her. A woman who had faced judgment without flinching. A woman who had held up a mirror to society and made them question their own biases. A woman who had made him question himself. The people who still refused to accept her. But while many had changed their tune, there were still those who wanted to see her fail. David saw it firsthand at an exclusive business gathering. James Harrington, the man who had mocked Anna at the gala, was speaking to a small group when David arrived. As expected, the conversation had shifted to Anna's interview. She played the long game. James muttered, swirling his drink. "I'll give her that." One of the men frowned. "What do you mean?" James scoffed. "She used us. She let the world tear itself apart with curiosity. Let the media obsess over her. And then, at the perfect moment, she takes off the veil and suddenly, she's untouchable." David's jaw tightened, because he knew what this was. A desperate attempt to twist the story back into something ugly. Before he could respond, another businessman spoke up. "I don't think that's fair," he said. "I think she did exactly what we all should have done from the beginning. She waited until we were ready to listen." David smirked. Finally, someone who understood. Anna's speech, the final word. 2 weeks later, Anna received an invitation to speak at a women's leadership summit. David expected her to decline. Instead, she accepted. And when the day arrived, the entire world watched. Anna walked onto the stage, standing before a packed auditorium. The energy in the room electric. She no longer wore the veil. But her presence was just as powerful. She stepped to the microphone, pausing as the silence settled. Then, she spoke. "I was never hiding. I was waiting to see if the world would ever ask itself why it was so desperate to see my face in the first place. Why a woman's worth is so often tied to how she looks. Why our stories are only given value when they fit into the expectations of others. I was waiting, and in that time, I watched how quickly people made assumptions. I watched how easily I became a symbol of everything people feared. Simply because they didn't understand me. And I realized something. It was never about me. It was about them. Because when people don't have all the answers, they fill in the blanks with their own fears. And fear? Fear makes people cruel. I didn't remove the veil to satisfy curiosity. I removed it to show you that your curiosity was never about me at all. It was about your own discomfort. Because I was never the mystery. The real mystery was why you needed one in the first place." The moment David saw her clearly. David sat in the front row, watching as the audience erupted into applause. Watching as people stood for her. Watching as his wife became something more than just a woman in a veil. She had never needed his protection. She had never needed his approval. She had never needed him to fight her battles. Because Anna Whitman had won the war before it even started. And David? For the first time in his life, he wasn't the powerful one. She was. And he had never wanted someone more. Session 9. David's change, choosing love over image. David Whitman had spent his whole life caring what people thought. It wasn't weakness, it was strategy. In business, perception was everything. In high society, reputation meant survival. He had spent years crafting his image. The powerful billionaire, the untouchable businessman, the man in control. But standing in the auditorium, watching as his wife commanded a standing ovation, he realized something. For the first time, he didn't care what the world thought of him. Because all he could see was her. Anna Whitman wasn't just his wife anymore. She was the woman who had made him question everything. And he had never respected anyone more. The aftermath of Anna's speech. By the next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Anna Whitman. From mystery to icon. The woman who made the world question itself. Not just a Whitman wife, a Whitman legend. David scrolled through the articles, feeling something he hadn't expected to feel. Pride. Because she had done this on her own. Without him. Without his money. Without his influence. And that made her more powerful than anyone in the room. A question he couldn't ignore. That evening, Anna found David in his office. Sitting at his desk, lost in thought. She stepped inside, her movements soft but sure. "You're quiet," she said. David exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "I've been thinking." Anna raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dangerous." David smirked, shaking his head. "I've been wondering, when did I stop seeing you as a mystery?" Anna tilted her head, and David met her gaze. "I think it was never you I was trying to figure out." He admitted, "It was me." Anna's lips parted slightly, her expression unreadable. David continued. I spent so much time worrying about what people thought, what my family wanted, what my business needed. He let out a slow breath. But when I saw you today, when I saw you standing on that stage, owning every single person in that room, his voice dropped. I realized I didn't give a damn about any of it anymore. Silence stretched between them. Then, softly, cautiously, Anna asked, what do you care about? Then, David stood, closing the space between them. He reached for her hand, his touch careful, deliberate. You. The night he chose her. For weeks, their marriage had been a tug of war. Push and pull, walls and barriers, misunderstanding and silence. But tonight, David wasn't pushing anymore. He was letting go. As he brushed his fingers along her jaw, Anna didn't pull away. As he tilted her chin up, she didn't look down. For the first time, she let him see her completely. Not just her face, but her trust. And for the first time, David wasn't thinking about power, or control, or perception. He was thinking about how badly he wanted to be the man she deserved. He exhaled, his forehead resting against hers. I want this to be real. Anna. Her breath hitched. Then, after a long pause, then stop holding back. And with that, David kissed her, not out of obligation, not out of expectation, but because he had never wanted anything more. The public declaration. 2 days later, David did something he had never done before. He called a press conference. Not for business, not for damage control, not for strategy. For her. As the cameras rolled, journalists whispered among themselves. Then, David stepped up to the podium, and the world fell silent. I've spent my entire life controlling the narrative, making sure the right stories were told, making sure people saw me a certain way. But today, I'm here to say, I don't care about that anymore. Because for the first time, I've learned what really matters. And it's not approval. It's not power. It's not keeping up appearances. It's about choosing the person who makes you better. The person who challenges you. The person who doesn't need you, but chooses you anyway. And I am choosing my wife. Not because the world finally sees her. Not because she proved anything to you. But because she has always been worth choosing. Even when I was too blind to see it. The world finally understood. The moment the conference ended, the internet erupted. David Whitman chooses love over image. The man WHO stood beside his wife, and won. A story that was never about a veil, but about trust. And for the first time, David Whitman wasn't the story. Anna was. And that was exactly how it should be. The final conversation. That night, David found Anna standing in their garden, gazing up at the stars. He stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her against his chest. She sighed, relaxing into him. You really said all of that? She murmured. David smirked. I did. Anna tilted her head. And you meant it? David turned her in his arms, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I've never meant anything more. She studied him for a long moment. Then, for the first time since their wedding, she smiled at him, truly smiled. And just like that, David knew. This wasn't about perception anymore. This wasn't about expectation anymore. This wasn't about doubt anymore. This was love. Real. Undeniable. And finally, theirs. Session 10. A love worth fighting for. David Whitman had spent his entire life chasing power, control, and success. But for the first time, he was chasing something else. Something he had never expected. Something he wasn't willing to lose. The final test. Anna Whitman had spent months being analyzed, judged, and underestimated. She had faced whispers. She had endured speculation. She had stood her ground when the world demanded she explain herself. But now, the world wasn't questioning her anymore. They were questioning David. Is this real? Or is he just playing another game? Can a man like David Whitman actually change? Anna didn't answer. Because this time, the only person who could prove it was him. A decision that changed everything. The day after David's public declaration, his father, Richard Whitman, called him to the estate. David already knew what the conversation would be about. He wasn't wrong. You've embarrassed this family, Richard said the moment David walked into his study. You've made a fool of yourself. All for a woman who... David held up a hand. Choose your next words carefully. Richard's expression hardened. You think you love her? David exhaled, a bitter chuckle escaping him. I don't think anything. He met his father's gaze. "I know I love her." Richard scoffed. "Love is irrelevant. This marriage was meant to secure our future. Our power. Our legacy." David took a slow breath. Then, for the first time in his life, he said the words he had never dared to say. "I don't want your legacy." Silence. The room felt heavy. Decades of expectations pressing down on him. But David? David had never felt lighter. Choosing her, over everything. That night, David found Anna on their bedroom balcony, watching the city lights. She turned as he stepped outside, her expression unreadable. "I had a conversation with my father today." Anna studied him, and David leaned against the railing, exhaling. "I told him I didn't care about the family's legacy anymore." Anna blinked. "David," he looked at her, his gaze steady. "I meant what I said." He continued, "I'm not doing this for the world. I'm not doing this to fix my image." He stepped closer, voice lower. "Sure. I'm doing this because I don't want a life without you." Anna inhaled sharply, because for the first time, she saw it. Not obligation, not expectation, not doubt. Just him. Just David Whitman. The man who had finally let go of everything that didn't matter. And had chosen her instead. The final vow. David took Anna's hand, bringing it to his lips. "I don't care about power." Anna. A kiss to her knuckles. "I don't care about control." A kiss to her wrist. "I care about you." A kiss just below her ear. Anna's breath hitched. And then, softly, finally, completely, she whispered, "Then I'm yours." The happily ever after they never expected. Their love story hadn't been easy. It had been messy. It had been painful. It had been unexpected. But it had also been real. And at the end of it all, David and Anna had won. Not because the world had accepted them, but because they had chosen each other. Over expectation, over power, over fear. Because in the end, love wasn't about control. It was about letting go. And David Whitman? He had never been more free. Love without conditions. David Whitman had once believed love was a weakness. That it was a distraction. A liability. That men like him, powerful, calculated, untouchable, didn't have the luxury of emotions. But standing here now, looking at his wife, the woman he had fought so hard against only to realize she was the one person he wanted to fight for. He knew he had been wrong, because love wasn't weakness. It was the bravest thing a man could choose. The final choice. The Whitman family had spent decades building an empire. And for just as long, David had been expected to be its perfect successor, strong, cold, and willing to do whatever it took to maintain power. But now, for the first time, he was choosing his own future. Not one dictated by image or expectation, but one where he was finally free. And that freedom? It wasn't in his money. It wasn't in his power. It wasn't in the empire he had built. It was in her, Anna, the woman who had walked into his life and made him question everything. The woman who had stood her ground, even when he had doubted her. The woman who had never needed his protection, but had somehow become the one person he couldn't live without. The public versus the truth. The world had finally stopped questioning Anna. After months of speculation, they had seen the truth. That she had never been the one hiding. That the real scandal had never been about a woman in a veil, but about how easily society dismissed people they didn't understand. Some people had apologized. Some people had doubled down. But David? David had stopped caring what they thought. Because the only thing that mattered was the woman standing beside him. And the life they were going to build together. The final vow. One evening, weeks after the world had moved on to its next scandal, David and Anna stood together on the estate's balcony, watching the sun set over the city. Anna turned to him, her eyes warm. "Do you regret it?" David smirked. "What exactly?" She gave him a knowing look. "Giving up the legacy, walking away from the expectations, choosing me." David exhaled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The truth?" Anna nodded. He leaned in, his voice low and certain. "I regret not choosing you sooner." Anna's breath hitched. And then, she smiled. A real, unrestrained smile. And in that moment, David knew, this wasn't just love. This was forever. Happily ever after, on their terms. David and Anna's love story had never been traditional. It had started with judgment, turned into a battle, and somehow, against all odds, it had become something real. Not because of fate, not because of fairy tales, but because they had fought for it. Because they had chosen each other, over and over again. And that was what love was meant to be. Not a perfect story, but one worth fighting for. Thank you for watching this Millionaire love stories today. Every love story is a journey, filled with passion, heartbreak, and unforgettable moments. And here at Millionaire Love Stories, we bring you the most captivating tales of love, wealth, and destiny. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget, like to support more incredible content. Comment your thoughts. Would you choose love over riches? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Millionaire Love Stories, because love knows no limits. Because love changes everything. See you in the next story.